afternoon. How's everyone doing after lunch? And I guess you've seen a lot of presentations already today. I'm usually into maybe delayed gratification, but because my announcer has said that we're going to discuss the ranking of cities for the ease of doing business in the Philippines, I realized as I was going through the presentation that comes about slide 12. And so rather than work my way to that, let me show that slide first and then go back and we can talk about how we got there. Those are the top 4 cities. These cities have the...
Question. Do we have Naga City there?
Pardon?
Naga.
Naga City is not. It was not a participant in the survey. Yeah, this is an interesting question, and maybe we can have more of a discussion. The cities, we started off, I think, with 18, and then we grew them to something over 20. Some cities are included more, and some cities are not included. Why? And which cities want to be included next time this is being done? And would a city be willing to pay for it to be included in this sort of research? These are kind of strategic questions that we're beginning to ask because we've now finished the second round. And AIM, the Asian Institute of Management, was our partner in the process, and they're questioning, do we do a third round? And if so, who wants to do it and who wants to pay for it? So I'm interested to know if there was that interest on the part of people here who are representing cities. I'm sorry.
When you started this one, did they initially pay also, or it's just the second batch who had to pay?
The question was whether the city had paid for the survey. And none of the cities had paid for the survey. The survey had been funded by IFC through the Canadian government and partly by AIM. But our view is that AIM is a very strong policy center and that it can do this work if it feels it's strategically part of its vision. And there's demand for it. And as we work in really sophisticated economies like the Philippines, like in Mexico, we found that the Mexican government is beginning to pay for this work and taking it on themselves. And we think that's an opportunity for the Philippines to consider also. It probably doesn't make sense that it's continuously paid for by diminishing donor funds. But that's a discussion I'm open to having. So let's go back. This is the ranking. Let's go back to the beginning, if we can. So who in the room is familiar with doing business? Doing business is probably the most popular report issued by the World Bank Group. I have seen the World Bank. And what it does is it ranks 183 countries on various means of doing business. Everything from starting a business to registering property to getting credit to closing a business. And it looks at it in a very analytical way. How many steps? How much time? How much cost? Or it might look at it in a degree of 10 attributes. And if it has, that we would consider positive. If it has 5 of the attributes, it would rank higher than a country that has only 4 of its attributes. Okay, the next slide, please. The ranking is really popular because it ranks countries. So we can compare China to Manila or to the Philippines to Singapore to New Zealand. That's caused a lot of consternation because many people would argue that, say, Brazil and China and Indonesia, which are very strong economies, rank rather low in the national rankings. They're all below 86. China is the highest of those countries at 86. So it's very important to point out that what the ranking doesn't do is measure infrastructure, size of market, quality of governance, and other factors that are really important to making a determination on whether one would invest capital requirement to enter the market. Then we go to expansion, registering property, getting credit, protecting investors, enforcing contracts. And all of those are measured in a similar kind of way. And all in all, we have about 10 indicators that we look at. Those 10 indicators are ranked by indicator, and then that's amalgamated into a final total ranking. Next slide, please. So, for instance, this is 148. It fell 2 places. This doesn't... It fell 2 places. This could be because there may have been plenty of reforms in the Philippines, but if other countries have reformed, it's not very strong, especially compared to other countries in East Asia Pacific. And then underneath the global rank are all of the indicators. And the one that we're going to be focused on today is starting a business. That's the one that we focused on in the subnational report that I'm going to come to. Here you see an improvement in the ranking. It went from 162 to 156, so a change of 6 places. And that's principally because of the reforms that were done in Manila City, in the city of Manila. IFC was working with the city of Manila, with Quezon City, and 2 other Metro Manila cities to streamline their business entry procedures. And we'll get to the results of that at the end. But the conclusion, or the result, has been that they have streamlined. And as a result of that, the Metro Manila. The working at the subnational level allows for city-to-city comparison along the same lines, using the exact same methodology as the national report. That's the next slide. And the objectives behind that are that it provides information to city leadership and national leadership about how cities are operating differently. And that can contribute to motivating reform. If one city sees that its next-door neighbor takes only 4 steps and costs X amount of pesos to register a business, but that city is the other city is, and that's really the key message about this report, that it can highlight differences in how cities are approaching the registration of businesses, and different cities do it differently, and some do it faster than others. Next slide. So in 2011, these are the cities that we looked at. And we looked at 3 of the 10 global doing business indicators. Starting a business, dealing with construction permits, and registering property. And why did we look at only 3? Because it's very expensive to do all 10. But also because these 3 were factors that were under some control of local government. Access to finance is not a local government issue, so it's really not been something that would be worthwhile examining. You'd see very little variance between the cities. We did this through as I mentioned, the Asian Institute of Management Policy Center, and we collected data from the cities as well as many, many representatives of the private sector. Next, please. So, what's happened? We did the report in the beginning, first in 2008 as a benchmark, and then we did it again in 2010. And I was nervous, because if nothing happened, then we would have thought the report was not very useful. But in fact, 65% of the cities that were surveyed engaged in some reform over the course of those 2 years. Now, one might say they would have done this reform anyway, and that's possible. Some might say that they were motivated to do the reform because they were being ranked and they were shown that they might be lower on the ranking and they could improve. It doesn't really matter. The important thing is that cities have been reforming over the course of this, and we've been able to measure some of that reform and reflect it back to cities that have, and reflect it back to cities that haven't, so cities know where they stand. And the population, thank you very much, the population of those cities also have access to that information and can raise this as an issue to their elected officials. Okay, next slide, please. This is a sort of complicated slide, and on the far left, those are the steps that local government are responsible for. This is getting your mayor's permit and everything that comes up into that process. The middle part is what national level responsibility is. So registering with DTI if you're a sole proprietor, or with the SEC if you're a limited liability company, getting your number from BIR, going to PhilHealth and SS, that falls into that category of national level. And then private is some work that the private sector is actually responsible for helping out with, printing of the receipts for BIR. Taken together, you get the total amount of steps. And you can see that in the Philippines, we have the lowest Cebu City in terms of steps, and Manila at 15. and the highest is Pasig at 22. So in a single framework, a regulatory framework that governs national level business registration, we have a huge variance. And this is, I think, another really valuable message from doing this kind of analysis, is it shows that there's opportunity for change, and that a city like San Juan has the opportunity to do something a little bit different, and perhaps can match General Santos and reduce by 4 steps. Next one, please. So this is the cities that reformed over the course of the last 2 years, and areas in which they made a reform. I think we can go on. So, why do we do this? We see increased registration. If you make it easier to do business registration, you see less informality, increased registration, greater tax revenues, potentially. We've also seen an increase in employment through some of the analytical work the World Bank has done. And I think that's all very positive and supports economic growth. Next slide. So maybe I can pause here. I was going to go into the subject of starting a business a little bit. But before I do, I wonder if there's any discussion or questions about the methodology of the report, how we capture that information, or the difference between the global report and the subnational report. Any comments or questions?
It's not a comment or a question, it's a request. Can you speak a little louder?
I can.
Don't be louder.
Thank you, I can. And I'll hold the microphone a little more closer. Thank you. To me, it sounds loud.
We will request that those who will be asking questions will please introduce themselves for recording purposes.
Introduce yourself.
Well, in my case, I am Paul Diana from the Local Government Academy of the DILG.
A round of applause.
But is there more? All right, so when you're starting a business, this is many of the procedures that one has. Next slide, please. And we've seen this slide already. Next slide. And so when we are talking about reform opportunities, we find that one of the first opportunities is the streamlining by eliminating unnecessary steps. This is common sense. Some cities do it better than others. And the BPLS program by DILG, DTI, and LGA provide standards by which cities can apply streamlining. Another time saver is to classify businesses for inspections into risk. Some businesses are less risky than others, and not all businesses should be subject to the same level of inspection. And by being more judicious into which businesses are inspected and how often, it saves the resources of government, but it also makes it easier for a number of small businesses that generally aren't providing as much of a public risk, the burden of going through the inspection process. Many of the cities that IFC has worked with have created a central office and have taken the authority for approving permits from a number of other offices that had existed, consolidated it under the director of that office, gave that office the authority to sign on for the mayor's permit. This takes some political will. One gentleman who we talked with about doing this felt a little nervous because he was taking opportunity from some of his colleagues. But it was the mayor who said, no, this is time. It's time for this now, and we can do it. And they have, and they've made a really distinct change in how entrepreneurs are able to go and deal with the requirements of the local government to register. One of the areas that I wanted to raise your attention to and seek your feedback on is the step of BIR and the registration of books and receipts. This is an unusual requirement in my experience, and it's very time-consuming. And when we speak to BIR about it, they are fairly agnostic, saying it's not really required, but some municipalities and cities do require it. So they're kind of pushing off the responsibility for this step, even though it seems to be on the books as policy and required. But as you can see, it takes a lot of time. The variance is high, but in some cases up to 14 days. Average, in total, 9 days. 9 out of, I don't know what the total is for the cities, but 9 days is still a lot when some cities can register a business and or some countries can register a business in less than 10 days. So, do the cities that you represent require this? Is it possible that they don't have to require it? I would challenge you to look towards the opportunity of the latter. Now, I mentioned that IFC had been working with 4 Metro Manila cities. I just wanted to highlight, and I do it proudly, some of the results of Manila and Quezon. And I think that most interesting is the interface amount. From 15 interfaces to 2 and 28 interfaces to 2. This means there's a lot less opportunity for the entrepreneur to meet with the civil servant. And that means more transparency and an ease, less opportunity for opportunity. And then we've seen registration spike, 20% to 30% increases in registration. This is of a period of the year prior to the reform being implemented, and now 1 year after the reform had been implemented. I don't think that you're going to continue to see this trend of business registration growth at 20 or 30%. I think it will plateau, but I think this is a really strong indicator that there are probably a number of businesses in municipalities that are on the cusp of becoming formal that do not, because of the procedures that they're confronted with. So by reducing and making it easier, I think you will pull many more businesses into the formal environment. We calculate also cost savings, and this is important for mayors to understand and promote. By reducing the amount of time, cost, and steps, we calculate the amount of, using the average salary and the amount of time that a person in a business would take to go to the city and comply with all of the procedures. Put a cost on that, measure that by the number of businesses that register in a month, and come up with a savings. I haven't translated it to pesos because the numbers are nice and round here, but effectively $2 to $4 million annually are being saved to businesses. And I think that's a really important message to government leaders when they are talking about what they're doing to help the private sector in their municipality or city. So I hope that gives you a good idea of what IFC and the World Bank have been up to in terms of looking at cities and governments, trying to begin to capture relative differences between them and use those differences to help inspire or at least inform on reform opportunities.